Hi there, this is Professor Stewart. Welcome to part one of my screencast of Formalism and Realism. Every movie falls somewhere between realism and formalism. In general, realism is the type of film where a director attempts to portray reality in an artistic way, and formalism is more of a stylistic approach to film. In realism, you can follow it back to the very beginnings of film, which we'll see in a moment. Directors such as David Gordon Green, Jim Jarmusch, we'll be seeing some work by these directors. It represents film as a true record of reality. You'll see a lot of on location filming, less filming in a studio. Belief in unity of time and space. You won't see these types of films typically won't play around with time order as much. You'll just see sort of a beginning to end approach to the narrative. Realism has a basis in everyday reality. The author intrusion, for example, the author and our directors such as Alfred Hitchcock will comment on his subject using different angles, different filters on his lenses. But in realism, the directors just kind of shoot it as it is, constructed to seem unmanipulated and natural. As I said, long takes. There's the typical take is say 10 to 30 seconds, a take being the same as a shot. In realism, you might see shots as in the several minute range. Use of deep focus and the open form. Again, the open form means the type of film where it opens a window onto reality. It doesn't shut it out. Beginnings of realism, you can see one of the first pieces of film shot by the Lumiere brothers in 1895. It's simply an attempt to represent people arriving on a train. Let's have a look. May not seem very exciting to us today, but at the time, people couldn't believe what they were seeing. To capture and replay reality was not something that people were accustomed to. 1895, still photography was still pretty new. Now jumping into the present day, this is a film we'll be watching called George Washington by David Gordon Green. David Gordon Green went on to do some pretty big name movies. Pineapple Express, he directed Pineapple Express. But this is his first movie, and he wanted to do everything that he always thought a movie should do. He was young when he shot it. It definitely plays a lot like a student film. Let's take a quick look.
They had worked in wars and built machines. It was hard for them to find their peace.
Definitely the style and the use of narration is inspired, I would say, originally by the Sesame Street documentaries that have that naturalistic tone of voice and the improvised style of the children's perspective. But seeing it again and evaluating where the point of view was going to come from, watching films like Terrence Malick's Days of Heaven, where Linda Manns is not by any means the central character or even necessarily involved in most of the story of Days of Heaven, but her voice and her perspective brings this freshness and this childhood innocence to it that I've always thought was beautiful. And reading the original script of that film, it's not there, and I think that's what, to me, attaches me from the very first words of that film to the landscape and the environment and even the story. And it helped kind of us in George Washington. It helped using Nausea's perspective as a way to not use it just in a specific expository way, but a way to often even mislead the audience and to show somebody misunderstanding situations and the emotional impacts of that.
I like to go to beautiful places where there's waterfalls and empty fields. Just places that are
But wouldn't you say, David, also that, I mean, Terrence Malick's way of writing, like using very stripped down, basic language, instead of like his very, like, he can get poetic, but in a very sort of blue collar way with his words, just talking about bones and dirt and earth and hands. And it's not, I mean, I think that probably, that's the way that Tim writes. That's the way that you write. That's the way Craig writes. Chris, everybody has this very stripped down language kind of poetry to their writing,
and not making things so pronounced and profound
or pretentious,
and on the nose. It's using the stutters in the way that real people talk and communicate and miscommunicate. In Days of Heaven, just from the very first words and the stutters that she uses, it's just immediately we're listening to a real person talk, and it's not an Academy Award winner that's been theatrically trained. It's a human being, and this is the world she lives in.
David cast the people for what they are, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they say that they improvise the whole time, but they bring who they are into what they're saying, which is David's words.
These kids weren't self-conscious, so that wasn't one of the obstacles. They were very giving, and it's a matter of finding a balance between what's going to be too much and what's going to be intimate and specific about their character, rather than just letting them entertain the camera.
All right, so this was a commentary track with the director David Gordon Green and the actor Paul Schneider. They get right into it, and they basically define realism as making it seem natural, making it seem gritty, letting the kids be themselves on cameras. Also, David Gordon Green talks about an attempt to be authentic and avoid pretension, whereas in formalism, we're going to see pretension becomes sort of one of the aspects that's embraced. Again, with a commentary track, if you're not used to listening to them, anytime you can listen to a commentary track for movies we watch in this class, it's going to be a big help. All right, moving on to formalism. Formalism would cover any of the movies by Wes Anderson, any of the movies by Alfred Hitchcock, in which there's a massive amount of control over what the actors say, what the sets look like, and how the film is shot. You can see an embrace of the two-dimensional format, a cut and paste version of reality, a lot of editing. The shots are just raw material for the artist to create a vision of reality using edits, cuts, and montage, a lot of abstraction and symbolic use of the props and the mise-en-scène. Editing explores its own internal language. This means, for example, in Alfred Hitchcock, when you see a bird, it means chaos. It always does. You might see a bird in another movie, and it's going to mean peace or relaxation, but in Hitchcock, it always means chaos. Fast and slow motion, again, montage, quick cuts, a lot of camera angles. We're going to talk about the auteur film, which is the director who has a recognizable style as an auteur. Genre films are all formalist, musicals. They teach the viewer how to watch, again, the closed form. They close off that window to reality and create their own mini microcosm of reality. Okay, and we are just about out of time, so I'm going to close out part one on formalism and realism here, and ask you to please take a look at part two.